Welcome to Belfast Synagogue. This is the one and only synagogue in the whole of Northern Ireland. And in the province of Ireland, there are only 3 synagogues. Jewish people have been in Ireland since 1079, over 1,000 years ago. However, they were expelled from the United Kingdom in 1290, and they returned with Oliver Cromwell. There are records showing Jews in Northern Ireland in 1860, and the census records, there were 78 Jewish people living in Northern Ireland at that time. This particular congregation was established in 1870, and this is the 3rd building. The first one was in Great Victoria Street in the city centre. That served the community from 1871 to 1904. The second synagogue was in Annesley Street, and it still exists today, and it was taken over by the Department of Health as a gym, and it operated from 1904 to 1964. And this synagogue that we're currently sitting in was built in 1964 and is still in operation. At the height of the community, there were over 1,500 members, and due to the Troubles, a lot of people left. Today, there is currently about 70 members of the congregation. And we had many important people, such as Sir Otto Jaffa, who was the first Jewish Lord Mayor of Belfast, and he was German, and he came over to Belfast because he was in the linen industry. And there was also Gustav Wolff from Holland and Wolff, who later converted out of the Jewish religion. And there was also Harold Goldblatt, who was the founder of the Ulster Group Theatre. And then there was the famous Chaim Herzog, who became the 6th president of Israel, and whose son is now the current president of Israel. So that gives you a little short introduction to where we are today.
So thank you very much, Rabbi Kale, for that introduction. That's very interesting and helpful to us. And it's a pleasure to be here in the synagogue to mark Holocaust Memorial Day 2024 with conversation and the lighting of the Holocaust Memorial Day candle. And it's my privilege, if I just take a moment to introduce for those watching, we know yourself, Rabbi David Kale, and the Most Reverend John McDowell, Church-Varland Archbishop of Armagh and Primate of all Ireland, and Mrs. Shirley Lennon, who's representing Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, Northern Ireland. And thanks to each of you for making time for coming and having this conversation today. So, Rabbi David, perhaps I could, as well as to say thank you for hosting us, I could ask, you've given us a little bit of history, insight into the history and life of this place and the Jewish community here. We want to also take the opportunity to express to you warmest congratulations on your award last year, the MBE. And I wondered if you wanted to make any other comment about your own relationship with Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for your congratulations. Yes, I came to Northern Ireland 5.5 years ago from London, and the first thing that I found was that everyone was extremely friendly. The very first day I was here, I had to go into the city centre for a meeting, decided to go by bus. I got to the city centre, got off the bus, took out my map book, and somebody touched me on the arm and said, "Where do you want to go? Close your map book." So I told the person I wanted to go. He said, "Oh, it's around the corner. I'll escort you there." And I thought, how lovely. You won't get that in London at all. So it's absolutely wonderful to be here in Northern Ireland. Everyone is extremely friendly, extremely warm, and I'm very glad to have made the move here.
That's lovely. That speaks very well for us as a community. Thank you very much. So Shirley, you've been working for Holocaust Memorial Day Trust for a few years now. Last year, a few of us gathered in St Patrick's Cathedral, Armagh, on a rather chilly January day to light the Holocaust Memorial Day 2023 candle. Do you remember the title of the theme last year for HMD? And can you tell us this year's title and theme? And perhaps you can fill us in as to why it has been chosen.
Yeah. Yes, it's a real privilege to be working for the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and the theme in 2023 really resonated with me, as it's supposed to do, each year. But the theme last year was ordinary people, and the idea behind it really was that the Holocaust affected ordinary people. It was ordinary people who suffered in it, but interestingly also it was ordinary people who are the perpetrators of genocide. And so that was very challenging, I think, for us all to realise that these things happen to ordinary people. So I felt that theme was an excellent choice. Each year, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust is responsible for choosing a new theme. And one of the reasons we do that is to encourage new people to get involved and to become interested by that choice of a theme and to inspire them in some way. And by choosing a new theme, we also want to reach out to those who are already organising activities, who need to look at things from a different perspective, a different angle each year. So for 2024, the theme that we chose was the fragility of freedom. And I suppose freedom can mean different things to different people, but it is clear that in all genocides, freedom is severely restricted or is removed totally. And so that's something that is shared by all of the genocides that are commemorated as part of the Holocaust Memorial Day activities. And I suppose, Anne Frank, when she was writing her diary, she spoke of how freedom, even owning a bicycle, was restricted. Or other people have spoken about how cinema going wasn't allowed. And especially, freedom of movement. People were forced to live in ghettos or in prisons, and eventually the freedom to live was removed from those people as they were murdered too. And so freedom, it can be very fragile. And in this modern world, I think it's important that we focus on the fact that it's important to protect that freedom. And I think that's what the theme is aiming to do this year.
Thank you very much, Shirley. So the fragility of freedom is uppermost in our mind this year. Perhaps, Archbishop John, I can put an open question to you relating to Holocaust Memorial Day and the subject and awful reality of genocide. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts to share on the 2024 theme of the fragility of freedom and some of the broad themes which I imagine the title is intended to embrace, as Shirley's referred to.
The fragility is very clear in many places in the world today. Just before Christmas, I was reading a book by Danny Finkelstein. It was called Stalin, Hitler, Mum and Dad. And it was about the experiences of his parents and of his grandparents during, just in the run-up to the Second World War, where you had in Germany what appeared to be a functioning democracy. That is, people voted people into power. What it didn't have was a free press or an independent judiciary or any of the organs which we associate with the upholding of freedom. So those things are always very important. The other thing which it didn't have was that very often in those years which saw the suppression of freedom in Germany and the subsequent Holocaust, was that the friendships that had been made over years weren't allowed to flourish. They were broken down. They were deliberately impeded. And even though, for instance, I don't know Rabbi David particularly well, we've met 3 or 4 or 5 times, and it's much more difficult to, as they would say now, other a friend than it is from just someone who you've never met or thinking about people in the aggregate. So, it's important that we learn from that history what happened in a very civilized state for it to break down into a form of barbarism and anarchy, and to try to make sure that those of us who have a voice continue to speak up for and to protect and do what we can to protect those institutions, particularly of freedom, so that it isn't as fragile as it might otherwise be.
Thank you very much, Archbishop John, for that. Yeah, so it's that thought that we are people, individuals, and we're better together from all traditions and none, and that there's hope always in that sense of working together and staying related to one another.
And I think remembering, there's a little quotation at the start of that book by Danny Finkelstein, and it's by a relative of his, a man called Wiener, who was one of the people who helped to get Jews out of Europe, and he had, in the end, he was in exile in London, and the Wiener Library's still there, and there's a little quotation from him, and he says, I'm prepared to forget, provided everybody else remembers. And that's an important, that these things are so fragile that we need always to remember that they can be undermined.
Yes.
That we may think it couldn't happen here, but it could happen here.
And I suppose with our own history on this island, we know how fragile freedom is and how hard it is to rebuild when it's lost. Thank you very much. I wonder, do any of you have anything more you'd like to add? Perhaps, Rabbi David, you would like to close the conversation, if you like, before we actually
Sure.
light the candle?
Of course. So I think we have to remember that every individual is created in the image of God, and every individual has a little spark of God inside them. And I think we also have to remember that we are all on this earth in order to fulfill God's purpose. And if God only wanted one religion or one type of person, he would only have created them. We work together like an orchestra. You take an orchestra and you listen to each individual instrument on its own. It makes a very nice sound, but put them all together and you have the most beautiful song and chorus. So we have to always remember that diversity brings beautifulness. Diversity helps us fulfill what is required in this world. If you could imagine that every bird was coloured red, there would be nothing beautiful about it. I remember a story once told about a famous artist. He painted 3 paintings. All of them were identical. The first one was only in pencil. The second one had only one colour. And the third one had different colours. When people looked at them, they only really saw all the different colours. So we have to remember that it's diversity that brings beautifulness to the world, and that people, being different, all bring their own strengths. And so together we fulfill God's purpose.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, Rabbi David, and each of you. And I know we're only scratching the surface of what Holocaust Memorial Day is all about, and that theme of the fragility of freedom. But I think it's very worthwhile for us to meet together and to have the conversation that we've had. And thank you, and we'll light the candle.
Shirley.
Holocaust Memorial Day is a day to bring everyone together, to commemorate, to remember and reflect. And we'd really just like to encourage you all to take part in that. It's a day for everyone to do so. Thank you.
A prayer for the souls of the departed. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and the pure ones, who shine like the glow of the firmament. For the souls of the holy and the pure ones who were killed, murdered, slaughtered, burned, drowned and strangled in Auschwitz, Shumeno, Treblinka, Sobibor, Majdanek, Bejec and Maritoszenec, for the sanctification of the name through the hands of the German oppressors. The whole congregation is praying on their behalf in remembrance of their souls. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shelter of his wings for eternity, and may he bind their souls in the bond of life. The Lord is their heritage, and may they repose in peace on their resting place. And let us all say, Amen.
Amen.